Good morning, my name is Chris Fox, and today we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons, one of my favorite things. And if you can believe this, I have been playing it for 41 years. I started playing when I was 6 years old. And the reason I'm an author today is because I started out as first a player and then a dungeon master. I loved fantasy at a young age. Well, many of us, I think, are the same, and I know that a lot of you don't write fantasy. You may still find this to be useful. It could be useful in almost any genre. There are lots of different types of role playing games out there. It allows you to cooperatively create a story. That's ultimately what these role playing games do for those that are unfamiliar. So, players have a role in the story, and as the GM, you may not know what's going to happen. They may decide to go somewhere you didn't expect or do something you didn't expect, and they come up with many wonderful ideas that you didn't expect. So, oftentimes, as I'm telling a story, my idea for what was going to happen isn't as good as what one of them will theorize. They'll say, oh, I bet it's this. And yes, of course it's that. If your idea is better than mine, great. You just overwrote the GM. That makes for better stories. So I've been doing that now for 7 months in this campaign, and you're going to see my Scrivener file in the second half. We'll go over it, and you'll see what I'm turning it into. So I'm going to take this campaign that I ran, the Empire of the Scale campaign, it's called, and I'm going to make a humorous fantasy series. The first book is entitled Woodworkers Must Die, and there's the cover for you. And I'm not done with the cover. We may play with some more drafts, but that's what Lisa's put together currently, and I like it so far. And that's Ud, our protagonist. He's very unassuming. I'm trying to layer as much humor as I can into this alongside good character development. So we will have a serious story with serious stakes, but also a lot of humor. So sort of like what the early Marvel movies did before they became a caricature of themselves. That's what I'm aiming for, but in a fantasy world. So if you're a D&D fan or a fantasy fan of any kind, you're going to love this book. That's my goal. I want to take the campaign that I'm running through Dungeons & Dragons and turn it into that. And the beauty of having players is I can test a lot of the jokes on them and see how they react. They make their own jokes, which make it into the novel. One of the things that has been hilarious, the player of a character named Wilhelm can't remember Ud's name. Ud is our main character on the cover of the novel. He's the woodworker who must die, the one being hunted. And this player could not remember the NPC's name every time he showed up to the session. So he would say something different. Oh, it's Ud? You know, he would just get it wrong by a syllable and be off. And it was hilarious every time to the other players and to me. And so that's made its way into the novel. And so Wilhelm can't remember Ud's name. So I found that my story is stronger as a result of having it run through a group of people. I mean, you've heard the saying, two heads are better than one. Well, three heads or four heads or five heads, or some of you crazy people with 8 people in your campaign, 9 people's heads are better than one. You get so many better ideas, and I think a story told collaboratively can be so amazing. So we'll go ahead and jump into the second half of the video. We're going to take a look at my screen and go through a bit of my Scrivener document. We'll give away everything in case people are interested in reading the novel. But I'll show you what the notes look like for a D&D campaign, what the session reports are like, kind of how I do things. And every DM does things differently, so don't expect this to be any sort of standard in the industry. It's just how I do things. But you'll see how I, as a random dungeon master, take my notes and turn that into an outline that can be used to generate a novel. I'm going to start writing it in earnest on Monday. Should be able to crank it out in just a couple of weeks like I have every other novel. And plotting this was way easier than anything else I've ever done because I'm just going directly to the notes of the sessions that have already happened. That's where the plotting was required. Anyway, let's jump into the second half and we'll see what I put together. Okay, so this is what the Scrivener document looks like. It's not terribly different from your typical novel, and I still use it in Scrivener. So over here on the side here, you can see past scenes. That's parts that have already been dealt with. We finished the sessions. And then up here, stuff they haven't done yet. And then at the end of every session, let me open this up, I will do a session report. So let's grab this one at random. And I'll go over everything that happened in the session, whether they got experience or levels, if they got any magic items. And it's enough information to turn it into a real outline. So if you look down here, we've got a standard outline. It looks a lot like you've seen other novel outlines in other Scrivener documents I've done in the past, though I know it has been a couple of years, I think. But you can see I turned it into what ideally is going to be a 100,000 word novel just by taking this stuff and turning it into what happened in this side. And then anywhere that didn't quite fit, I've made whatever changes I need to, and then I've also added interludes for one of the NPCs, Sylvie, who you do see in the sessions we've played, but isn't playing a large role. But in the novel, she's much more important. And this is sort of Ud's love interest and a way for me as the author to tell the reader everything they need to know that isn't covered in the main narrative. And it works pretty well. So the basic premise is that the elves are hunting humans because elves are descended from the trees and believe they are sacred and think that anyone who works with wood in any way is the equivalent of a human necromancer, where that's arboreal desecration and you are doing something awful in their opinion. So they use bone arrows, they don't use wooden arrows, they don't use wood in any way unless it's living wood. So they do have wooden bows, but those are living wood gifted to them by the trees. So they'll have a living, let's say, oak bow or redwood bow or whatever tree they got it from. And sure, that's fine, but that's still alive and it was gifted to them. The idea of having a dead bow that Boyer made, that's something that does not sit well with them, and obviously they're not terribly fond of Ud. So it's an amusing concept that I'm taking and running with, and there are other jokes in the novel that are also really funny like that. So one of the early spoilers, and you'll get to see as I'm writing this, I want to kick it off with something really funny. And what I came up with, the basic concept, is that dogs can't eat chocolate because they'll get really sick or they'll die. And I've got werewolves. Well, what if werewolves had the same problem with chocolate that dogs had? So I have to set up a scenario where Ud gets chocolate early on and then is able to feed it to some werewolves. And this is all done in the name of humor. I'm trying to just create a funny situation that leads into the rest of the novel. And I think I've succeeded in doing that pretty well, because that kind of humor goes a long way if you plant it well. But I've got to be subtle with it. So we'll see how it turns out. You guys will get a chance to read the novel, the beta, and see if I'm doing it justice. Thus far, I've only written the prologue in the first chapter. I'm really just getting started and mostly working on the plotting. And if we go back into the past scenes, I showed you one of my ends of the sessions, and you can see the fifth here. This means they got fifth level. This means they got fourth level. This means they got third level, and so on and so forth. Each one of these also is dated, which is kind of cool, so I can see how long it took us if we go back to the first one. So I guess I started in early May, and it's been running since. This information has been useful. The other files that you see are what I use beforehand. So before a session starts, I have my cast, I have my basic idea of what is likely to happen, but that's it. I don't really know. I'm sort of setting a scene and then seeing how it plays out. And I've got a few ideas for scenes, but when you're done and you actually make your session notes, about 75% of this probably came from one of the three scenes, and then 25% of it was stuff I didn't even think of. In some sessions, that's like 90% stuff I didn't think of. So the only files that really matter to me when outlining are these end session files. And that's really where I was pulling everything from. But prior to that, actually running the game, all of these individual scenes are super useful. And as you can see, I've got more of them for upcoming adventures. So this is book 2, basically, right here. We're already working on that. And there's at least enough for me to do a trilogy. And we'll see how much further than that it goes. I'm not going to try to artificially extend this. I'm just going to tell the story and then eject, not try to overstay my welcome. But I think this is going to be a really funny fantasy if I do it justice. So I have so many jokes I've been saving that are making it into this one. The werewolves and chocolate is just one of them. And we'll see what works and what doesn't. Some of the stuff may need to be dialed back. I may find that I have too many jokes in there and end up cutting some of them. It's going to be a fine balance. So this novel is going to be different from some of the others that you've seen me write. I'm taking a lot more care in getting it perfect and making sure that it's exactly the effect that I want it to be in a way that I haven't been able to do on past books. I didn't get a chance to run a 7-month campaign and refine my ideas before writing previous books. It was always oh crap, I have to have a book out in 4 weeks. What am I going to write? Now I have the time to really kind of think about things consciously. And I think if I put enough TLC into this novel, it can be the funniest one that I've written and possibly my best book, period. So if you have questions about Woodworkers Must Die in the comments, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the basics. I'd love to do more videos on this topic and talk about other stuff you want to know about it. But since we're just getting started, I'm not sure what that is yet. So let me know. I will start writing it on Monday. which means that within 2 to 3 weeks this will be finished, so we can have a few report videos along the way showing you sort of how it shapes up, and then maybe together we can make this into something amazing. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I'm going to go ahead and get back to the writing, and I will see you guys next week.